many of you know, Gard Jameson and I met, well, 25 years ago at Pacifica in our doctoral program in Myth. Um, from the very beginning, he was a special person in my world. He came to Pacifica from a rather substantive life. He was in the first graduating class of religious studies at Stanford, and after that, he moved to Berkeley, and he took an MBA in accounting and spent quarter century as a CPA. He helped found the Children's Advocacy Alliance, the Interfaith Council of Southern Nevada, Compassionate Las Vegas, the Alf Museum of Life, and Nevada Community Foundation. He has authored 3 books on spiritual epics, Phaethon, Monkey, and the Ramayana. He just completed a book on the Beatitudes. And I really think the book that is just so beautiful is this book on Nicholas Roerich. He recently completed a film documentary on Ubuntu, and he and his wife Florence are the proud parents of 2 precious daughters, MJ and Julia. I just can't say enough about Gard. He has stepped up in my world whenever I've needed, an advocate or a friend, or I'm even a patron or a client. Today's presentation is the result of people reaching out after the Myth Salon last Wednesday on the Enneagram, and he brought these wonderful 2 women in, and we just dived into it for a couple hours. So with that, let me turn it over to Gard, and thank you, Gard, for showing up today and being part of our group for this morning.
Thank you, Dana. It's a joy to be with you all. And what can I say? Back at you, Dana. We are wanderers, all of us, today. And this is a confused and distressing world. But what I've learned along the way is that there can be a quality of joy and a quality of freedom, even in the midst of that distress and that trauma. So thank you to you. And Jonathan, thank you to you. That video was extraordinary. And I do believe in a previous life, you may all not know this, but in a previous life, Dana was a lama in Tibet, somewhere in the mountains of Tibet. And he's just recovering that sensibility. So it's my joy to bring to you all this morning just to sort of whet your appetite, appreciation of an ancient teaching. And I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And let's see, I'm getting echo here. So you see the image, and I think many of you have heard the word Enneagram and are probably familiar. I know Ruth self-identifies as a 7. We'll talk about these things, but we don't quite know. I was privileged to be a student of Russ Hudson and Don Rizzo. In fact, took my training in Woodstock, New York, where we also did holotropic breathing, which was something else, but that's for another day. And these images of the Enneagram come from Gurdjieff, who I actually am a big fan of and spend a lot of time reading. And Gurdjieff is the one who really turned my world inside out, upside down. But what you see is a circle, you see a triangle, and you see a hexagram. And what we know in the world of spiritual understanding is that there's a law of 1, a law of 3, and a law of 7. In Taoism, Dana was just illustrating the law of 3, which is there is antithesis, thesis, and then synthesis. And any good joke, as all of you know, comes with three legs. But these are laws that govern the entire universe. Um, Albert Einstein called it the cosmogenic genetic principle. They cover everything, and they're laws of unity, diversity, and growth. Unity, diversity. So unity comes with the law of one. Diversity comes with the law of three, as Lao Tzu says in chapter 42, out of the three comes the 10,000 things. And the law of seven is the law of growth, or perhaps retrogression, if we're not attending to the fact that we're either growing or we're dying in this life. So this is where it comes from. Again, we don't know ancient Persia, Vedic India, somewhere in that region, these teachings emerged. And what they displayed was that we all carry a mask. And the word person comes from the Latin, which means mask, and that we each carry this mask. We each carry a quality of energy, which allows us to show up in our worlds. What most people are ignorant of is that their energy is not the only energy, that there's diversity in energy. And the sooner, as I tell my students, we get used to diversity, the better life will be. And I quote Tevye, whether the rock hits the jar or the jar hits the rock, it's bad for the jar. So there's diversity in personality, and it's important to know. And I also tell my students, imagine a softball team with 9 players. You wouldn't want the catcher to be the pitcher or the pitcher to be the first baseman. Each has its talent, each has its limitation. And probably the greatest lesson we learn in life is teamwork. How do we work together? And how do the extroverts allow room for the introverts, and the introverts listen deeply to the extroverts? So there's a wonderful poem, which I'm going to share with you now, and then I'll come back to this image. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. This is from Rumi. And this is really important because we all have our ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. And each of the personality types has its ideas of wrongdoing and right doing. And that's really where we get into a lot of trouble because when you don't see the way I see, I get frustrated. And when I get frustrated, I create, as we'll see in a moment, a quality of suffering. So the field beyond that ideas of wrongdoing and right doing is right there in the middle. You see the zero, which is infinity. It's an infinite well. And in India, it's expressed by the word ananda or bliss, joy. In the West, we have Galatians 5:22, the idea of the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, and peace, among others. This is the field where Rumi is inviting us beyond our masks, beyond the roles we play in the outer world. And it is to this field that we are called on the hero's journey. So it was back in the 50s that a fellow named Oscar Ichazo discovered the link between Enneagram and personality types. And what I want to say very clearly, my personal experience is that personality indeed follows type. And when you explore the world of the Enneagram, and when you get together with persons of your similar typology, you will be blown away. When I get together, I'm a 9, and when I get together with 9s, it's like, oh my God, you don't do that too, do you? And invariably, it's very humorous, but it's also revelatory in the sense that we begin to appreciate, again, as we say in philosophy, philosophy is just about energy and how we move the energy. And so each of us carries a particular typology. But having said that, let me underscore the fact that each of us is absolutely unique. My wife, who's an OBGYN, says, without duplicate in infinity, irreplaceable in all eternity. as she delivers every one of her children. She shares that with the parents. So there are 9 divine attributes, gifts, if you will, that are inhabit each one of these energy centers. There are also 9 passions, or what's called in the West deadly sins. And this is an interesting one, which we'll talk about in a moment. You'll note that the 7 deadly sins, maybe it should be 9. Well, we'll talk about why it became 7 in a moment. So the Enneagram is a tool for self-realization. And like every tool, it's a medicine, but it's also a poison. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to go around typecasting people. What you do want to do is you want to be familiar with the energy that's in the room. And when I became aware of my father's energy and my mother's energy and my older brother and my older sister and my younger sister, what expanded in my heart was compassion, because I began to see the energy that they bring to the field. And when you begin to see that, you can see both the pieces that we're grateful for and the pieces that create limitation. And we can begin to understand the limitations. And I only quote this great philosopher once in my classes. You may know the name Clint Eastwood. A man's got to know his limitations, right? And part of the Enneagram teaching is knowing our limitations and knowing what we're called to. So again, the Enneagram is a tool for self-realization. It also helps us understand how our ego gets trapped in this prison of energy if we don't see beyond the energy, if we don't see that field beyond the ideas of right doing and wrongdoing. Claudio Naranjo, back in the 70s, became interested in the Enneagram work through Echazo. He visited him, and he began to ally certain psychiatric understandings with the Enneagram. So when you study the Enneagram, you can see in unhealthy states mental conditions which are described in the DSM and are very interesting and help, again, with my older sister. She's a borderline personality disorder, and I get it, and I wish her well. It's difficult to be with her. Her energy is a very difficult energy, but I get it. And in my loving kindness meditation every morning, she's there. She's in 2 buckets. One is family and friends, and the other a person with whom I have tension. So there's a deep connection between spirituality and psychology if we truly understand what this thing, the Enneagram, is about. What we appreciate in the Enneagram is that there's a core motivation to each of the types. And I suspect that many of you already know your typology and you identify with some of these core motivations. Again, I'm a 9, and it's about keeping the balance. I'll pick on myself today, and we'll take a little deeper dive. The ones, my mother was the 1, do the right thing, and you better do the right thing. My wife is a 2. She's a helper. She's a physician. And very often you'll find people in the healthcare field or in various fields where there is giving who align with that energy. My father was a 3. He's very gregarious, very extroverted. The 3s and the 8s dominate corporate industry. They are the CEOs for the most part of corporate industry because they're so extroverted and they're so dominant in their energy that people don't dare come up against them. I'll tell you a quick story about my father, the 3, which is an image energy. He went to dinner one night with 3 couples, Danny Kaye and his wife, Danny Thomas and his wife, and Red Skelton and his wife. And after dessert had been served, my father stands up and starts telling jokes. Danny Kaye leans over to Danny Thomas and said, "Who the hell is this civilian?" Right? Anyway, so again, very interesting traits associated with these energies. And again, introverted, extroverted energies associated with each one. The fours, right, have a desire to be unique and authentic. They live in a world in which creativity and individualism is extremely important. And what's fascinating about the Enneagram is you can actually overlay these energies on various cultures. So France and Italy tend to be four cultures where it's about beauty, it's about vive la différence, it's about individualism. It's not about the team. We went over there one time as a family, and nobody smiled. And I told my kids, "I'll give you $1 to get somebody to smile," and nobody smiled. They didn't get $1. I was told by a friend of mine who lives outside of Paris, Gard in France, everybody is a stranger unless they're family. Hmm? So again, there's a kind of individualism there. There's a kind of creativity. There's a attraction to beauty, which is extraordinary. And my stepmother was a four. And then the fives are all about systems and all about understanding connections. And you always want a five in the room when you're looking at a system or you're looking at a situation or a problem, because they're able to take a lot of different viewpoints and put them together in a very tangible and appreciative way. And we love the fives. And the fives and the fours are introverts along with the nines. The sixes are about safety and security. They're about belonging. Germany is a six culture. It's about the group. It's about the Weltanschauung, and it's about loyalty to the group. Uh, what we're learning, hopefully, in this moment is that the group is much, much larger than the family, the province, or the country. It's a global belonging that we're all part of. And then the sevens, Ruth proclaimed herself as a seven, experiencing it all, avoiding the pain. I once did an Enneagram training at UCLA, and just as a matter of curiosity, I gave them a quick test to find out who was in the room. 3/4 of the room were sevens. Sevens are always looking for a new experience. They're always looking for a quality of pleasure, of joy. And my dear younger sister is a seven. If it's 9 o'clock, she's playing tennis. If it's 11 o'clock, she's talking to her travel agent about the next trip. And if it's 1 o'clock, she's with the girls having a great time. And it's all wonderful. Sevens walk into the room and they make us all feel better about ourselves and about them. Eights are in control, and it's about strength. And again, if you look at corporate America, my brother was the international president of YPO, which is a humble group of corporate executives around the world. And when you walk into my brother's office, you will see pictures of him and Madeleine Albright and George Bush and blah, 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 blah. So that's a brief tour around the wheel of the Enneagram. What we also know is that there are limitations, and so there are passions, and oftentimes we can identify our home base. And I want to say there is a home base, and what Rizzo and Hudson have convinced me of is that we're born with that home base. It's not something that grows as a function of time. It's something that you're born into and you develop into over time. So you can see 9 passions or, quote, deadly sins. And I want to ask if anybody wants to raise their hand and identify the 2 that are not part of the deadly sin category. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Angst is one of them, isn't it?
What's that?
Angst is one that's not.
Well, and I apologize. That should say anger. And Afton, do you have?
6.
I would say angst and avarice.
Oh, angst is a 6. Yes, excuse me.
Yep.
Known as the anger. Okay, you've got 1, angst, or we'll call that fear. Fear was taken off the list. And there's another one. It's not avarice. Avarice is also greed, and greed is one of the 7 deadly sins.
Vanity.
Would it be anger?
Vanity.
No, anger is definitely there.
How about vanity?
Vanity is definitely there. It's self-deceit, number 3. self-deceit, or, oh, excuse me, vanity.
Have vanity there.
Yeah. So it's Rizzo and Hudson oftentimes talk about, I had all the pictures covering that, so I didn't quite see it. So vanity, yes. So vanity or self-deceit and angst or fear. And you know who took them off the list? Pope Gregory, the great Pope Gregory in the 6th century. He was approached by a monastic by the name of Evagrius Ponticus, and he shared with the Pope 9 qualities which he felt kept people away from experiencing that field beyond right doing and wrongdoing. And the Pope said, well, I'll agree with you on 7 of these, but vanity and angst, or I prefer the word fear and self-deceit, are not on my list. So, and I don't want to step on any toes, but I think it's pretty clear that there's an institution on the planet that is engaged in a certain amount of self-deceit and motivated a certain amount of fear. And it's, yeah, anybody want to name it? The Catholic Church, Pope Gregory, right? So I was told by a friend who was in the victims abuse office during the 90s when we had so many exposés of pedophilia that they were told, the whole staff was told, you will never say, I'm sorry. That's self-deceit. And it doesn't seem to align with the values of the institution. But as what Dr. Freud, the great Dr. Freud said, what you repress will come back to haunt you. So again, becoming familiar with what holds us back is a way of growth. So for me, the 9, it's sloth. It's about wanting balance. It's about wanting harmony and peace. And if I don't see it, if I see conflict or I see difficulty, I go into my room, slam the door, go under the covers and say, to hell with all of you, right? That's sloth, or it's also called acedia. So these 9 passions are really important in the discovery of ourselves, self-knowledge. What I want to say now is that there are 3 dimensions to each of us as persons. There's a vertical dimension, there's a horizontal dimension. The vertical dimension is a spiritual dimension and calls us to spiritual growth and calls us to some kind of practice. And within that dimension, or the y-axis, we begin to experience a quality of depth. We begin to experience unconditional love. We begin to experience a quality of joy. And within the x-axis, which is the moral dimension of our personalities, we begin to discover our relational connection to one another. And this is why the Enneagram is, I think, an incredibly valuable and important tool, is because when we do that, as I said earlier, when I began to see my family, and they self-identified, and my own family, Florence is a 2, and my 2 daughters, one's an 8, and one is a 4. Very creative. She's an artist in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Again, compassion emerges. And so I'm part of Compassion Las Vegas, and I'm on the board of the Charter for Compassion, which is a global movement suggesting that we could be a more compassionate planet. If anybody doesn't think that we could, see me after class. But we could be a more compassionate planet. And that if we put compassion as our North Star, we have a way forward. And as I say, compassion is the linchpin between love and growth. So each of these dimensions, the moral dimension, the X, and the spiritual dimension, the Y, require some core competencies and require us to engage in practices. You don't just sit back and let this stuff unfold. You actually have to show up. And so you're doing it right here in what I call circle of trust. Rufus Jones, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1947 for his work after World War I and World War II, said, I pin my hopes on small circles in which transforming events can take place. In other words, the answers are not in Washington, D.C. or in your home capital. The answers are in these small circles. The answers will come bubbling up from the roots, from the baseline upwards. They won't come down, as we can, I think, pretty clearly see. Out of the Y and the X comes our journey. And that is the axis of growth, or what Jung called individuation, and requires a quality of wisdom and compassion. So a friend of mine, Wayne Teasdale, wrote a book called The Mystic Heart, and he suggests that there are 9 elements of a universal spirituality. And what I want to point to right now is number 6, cultivating mature self-knowledge. Cultivating mature self-knowledge. And that's kind of the center point between the Y and the X axis. It's the place where we begin to realize, as Alan Watts said, that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, not the other way around. And as such, we have moral obligations. We have a moral engagement, Thich Nhat Hanh, engaged Buddhism. How do we engage the moral field? So the Enneagram gives us the appreciation, again, of diversity. It gives us the appreciation of our unity, that we are a team, that we are one, but that we are diverse in our energy and in our manifestation. And so on this slide, I really only want to point out body types, which is gut types of persons, the 8s and the 9s and the 1s. My brother is forever saying, what's your gut telling you to do, Gard? So there's gut intelligence, and we're learning that from the neuroscience. There is heart intelligence. These are the 2s and the 3s and the 4s, right? And they come primarily from the heart, sometimes aware of it, sometimes not so aware of it. And then there's the head types, the 5s, the observers who can put everything together and help us understand how things connect. The 6s who are, it's very interesting. You can apply all these typologies to the 12 apostles. Thomas, doubting Thomas, was a 6. He was always asking the questions that everybody else had in their head, but were afraid to ask. And so again, here is where we garner insight and understanding through the head. And the 7s, a little less aware that they're head types, but they're very much in their head. And again, very much looking for the connection, but on another kind of playing field other than the 5s. We say in Enneagram work that, yes, there are 9 primary types, but there are subtypes. So there's the self-preservation subtypes, there's the sexual subtypes, and there's the social subtypes. So you can get 27 different flavors, right? Baskin-Robbins. And so I'm a self-preservation 9. When I go on trips with Dana, we've been on many wonderful trips together. And again, tip of the hat, wag of the tail to my brother Dana. He has been indispensable in this journey and such a brother and such a friend. But when I go on a trip, I got to make sure I got my neck piece. When I'm on the airplane, I got to make sure that I've got a few cookies in the jar so that if I get hungry, I'm taking care of myself, right? There's self-preservation, and that's a primary instinct. In fact, it's the most primary of all the instincts. It is the one we share with all the animal species. In fact, we share all 3 of these. These are biological instincts. And there are 3 primal emotions that emerge from these instincts: fear, anxiety, and anger, which in India are called the kleshas, or the poisons. But actually, none of us would be on the screen if we didn't have these emotions. The question is, can we transform these emotions? And we can through self-understanding. We can by understanding that we have 2 core competencies that we need to cultivate, the spiritual and the moral. So I'm not going to go too far into this because I want to leave a little time for conversation.
Yeah, Gard, are you open to taking a question now? I think Afton has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm not now.
Okay.
Let's do it after I've gone
That was
through.
an accident. I hit it by accident. Sorry.
All right. Okay, sorry.
So-
Okay, go ahead.
But when we finish, because maybe we'll answer some of the questions as I've always discovered in class. So I'm a 9. We are peacemakers. We don't want conflict. We tend to procrastinate. I remember when I was in college, I'd set my watch to make sure that I got to class on time, but then I remembered that I'd set my watch, and so I got late every time. But we are introverts, and we tend to be very trusting. in fact, to the point of being naive. And we get taken advantage of because we want peace and we want to see both sides of the question. And so we make good mediators. A 9 with one wing is called the philosopher. So Dana has inspired me to teach philosophy at UNLV, which is my great joy. And again, we like staying home. We like stability, right? My wife will tell you that if I'd had my druthers, we'd be in the home we built in 1985. But Dana's been to my home. It's evolved since 1985. A lot of gardens she's put out there. She's really made it quite beautiful. And again, above all things, we want to be peaceful. And I would say that the dark side of the 9 is that we tend to forget ourselves. We tend to lose ourselves in the crowd. We tend not to speak up. And we tend to lose any sense of identity. We forget, right? It's Dorothy in the field of poppies. Poppies! We go to sleep. And so for the 9, we have to go to the 3, which is about projects. My wife and I love musicals. So in South Pacific, Billet said, what we need here is projects. And what Dana will tell you is, I've got a few projects. So the 9s are open, receptive, reassuring, and this is true of all of these. There's a healthy side to each typology, and there is an unhealthy, and then there's an average side. And Rizzo and Hudson, I recommend The Wisdom of the Enneagram by Rizzo and Hudson. Provide, I think, for me at least, the best clarity around healthy, average, normal, and unhealthy. When we become under stress, and this is where I said the hexad is a dynamic place, it's the place of dynamic growth. It's where growth occurs. When we come under stress, we revert to the 6, which is where we become anxious. Angst was the word. Fearful, defensive. 9s can be very passive aggressive. But when we're in growth, we're moving from, and I'll move my cursor from the 9 to the 3, which is where we're engaged, we're doing projects, we've got things on the burner. And that's what's keeping us from forgetting ourselves. That's what's allowing us to remember what we're here to do. And so each one of these has a point of stress, has a point of growth. And the third primary principle that governs the universe is growth. The first 2 are unity and diversity. So what I appreciate about the Enneagram is that it allows us to see the energies. It allows me to understand my mother, the one who's angry when she gets frustrated. And again, these emotions pop up when we get frustrated. As we say in Buddhism, when our desires are frustrated, there's a response. And so the 9 deadly sins aren't actually robbing the bank or shooting somebody. They're emotional responses to frustration. And when you get that, the neuroscience tells us that you can sort of head it off at the pass. So if you're an angry type and anger is starting to emerge within your reactive biological instinctual system, you can say, oh, look at that. I'm seeing anger. I'm about to get angry. and you can stop it. But if you don't stop it, what we know about anger and cortisol, the stress hormone, is it will be with you for probably 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, and it will kind of ruin your day. So again, my mother, if it was a 12 o'clock luncheon and you showed up at 12:15, God bless you, right? So again, each one of these carries strengths and limitations. The path of transformation for the 9s is remembering. For the 1s is to accept themselves as they are, because they tend to be perfectionists. They tend to want the world to be in perfect order. And what we know, I think all of us on the screen, is it's not. And so living with what is really important for the 1. For the 2s, it's about self-nurturing. It's about self-compassion. So my wife is one of the great OBGYNs, and I say it both as a husband, but also as an objective fact. She is regarded very highly. She's the head of Obamacare here, ACA. She's the AMA delegate. She's the one who fought for tort reform when the lawyers, trial lawyers, were coming down and saying, well, we want to make a cajillion dollars off of the backs of you physicians. She was the Joan d'Arc of that. But I, as a 9, have to remind her, dear, you need to take care of yourself. And so we need to chill, right? And so we meditate every day, and it's been a tremendous blessing for her in her path of self-nurturing and self-care. For the 3s, it's about truthfulness. The 3s tend to be vain and tend to engage in self-deceit. And again, my father and my other brother, who was married to my older sister, whenever my brother Gary put his arm up on the mantle of the fireplace, we knew that a big story was about to come. And so it's about being honest with ourselves, and it's about recognizing that we may have aspirations, but we may not be those aspirations quite yet. The 4 is about forgiveness. Again, there's a lot of drama in the 4 circle. It's all about beauty. It's all about individualism. It's about forgiveness of others, because 4s tend to be somewhat judgmental. Again, my stepmother was a 4, and learning how to forgive others and learning how to forgive ourselves. Learning how to forgive ourselves. The 5s, it's about compassion. 5s, their piece is avarice or greed, and it's about holding that knowledge in. They identify with that knowledge, and they piecemeal it out because they know that they gain power by piecemealing it out. But it's about being compassionate toward others and understanding that others don't necessarily see the big picture. And you've been blessed with the gift of seeing a big picture. So can you be compassionate? Can you bring that energy? Can you bring that awareness to the whole field? And the 6, we said, again, we have angst or fear being the most primal of all emotions. But as John says, perfect love casts out all fear. And that is the field beyond wrongdoing and right doing. And when we begin to experience and taste that field, we can begin to become courageous. And then the 7s, it's about gratitude. 7s tend to be the people who create the fun, create the enjoyment, create the atmosphere, the culture. But it's about being grateful for all of the different places. The 7s are very extroverted, and 7s have a difficult time with relationships because they're very aware of their own strengths and superpowers, but they tend to have some difficulty in appreciating or being grateful for the superpowers of others. And the 8s, it's about Brene Brown, it's about vulnerability, right? The 8s are very powerful in their extroversion, but they are very weak in terms of vulnerability. They very seldom show their cards. And as a result, they tend to be isolated, and they tend to live in their own world, knowing that that superpower of strength is a superpower, but it's also, as we said, not only a medicine, it's also a poison.
Gard, we got a little late start, but I would say about 10 minutes, if you got 10 minutes left here.
Yeah, no, it's 8:43, and this, in fact, is the last slide. So just take a look at that slide. Take a look at the 0. Recognize that the 0 is infinite. And if you take the law of 3 and the law of 7, so if you divide 1 by 7, you can do that on your iPhone, you will get an infinite sequence. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7. 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, to infinity. That's interesting. And if you take the law of 3, you see a triangle and it looks whole. But what you know, or what I know as an accountant, is that each piece, each angle is 0.333. Each angle, when you add them up, is 0.999. You never get to the 0. You never get to the 1. So there's a mystery associated with all of this. There's a mystery associated with personality. And as I said at the outset, and this is really important, is that each of us is absolutely unique as persons, but each of us carries a typology and a subtypology. And each of us tends to tribalize those typologies. Us nines, we tend to hang out with the fours and the fives. The godmother and godfather of our children, one's a four, one's a five. Surprise, surprise. When I'm at dinner with my siblings, I have one who's an 8, one who's a 7, one who's a 3. I just sit there and listen because they've got so much to say. And they are so extroverted and they're not interested. They're not interested in really hearing not only me, but also each other. So with that, I will stop for any comments or questions or understandings. I see a hand up. Afton, you've got your hand up?
Yes, just a little question. Do the colors have any meaning?
Afton, I've not gone that deep, but probably yes and no. I mean, the bottom line is we're a rainbow.
The 4 and the 5, which I'm a 4-5, is black, and that feels right to me. That feels we know how to go into the shadow.
Yeah, yeah. And each of us has our own shadow piece, and each of us, the hero's journey, as Dana will tell you, requires us to move through our passions, our limitations, and through the shadows. So thank you for sharing. 4 with a 5 wing.
Right. And so is my 12-year-old grandson, which I was fascinated. He owned it. He just loved taking it. And it just excited him so much to see himself. And we're so close because we know each other. And he has a 1 and a 9 parent, and they don't get him. They don't get me. And we struggle with that. So thank you. I love the Enneagram. All my clients take it, and I work with all of them from the Enneagram.
It's very important, isn't it, Afton? Thank you so much. Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Gard. A wonderful presentation. Quick question. It's compelling that there seems to be an overlay with astrology, the system there, and the Enneagram. The Sagittarian 7 and a Libran 9 jump right out at me. Do you have any comment on the connection?
My dissertation advisor, Rick Tarnas, was big into astrology, still is. I am not familiar with astrology. All I know is I'm a Taurus, and oftentimes my friends say I'm full of bull. Yeah.
Thank you. Good enough.
Yeah, but you're making a point which is very interesting. There's connection to the chakras. So the first 3 chakras are the subtypes. The subtype of self-preservation, of esteem and affection, and power and control. So those chakras are very well connected. And that's why sometimes we say this is connected to Vedic understanding, because in the chakra teaching, there's a very clear understanding of the qualities of energy that are possible and that exist. So, Mary Grace.
I just really appreciate your presentation so much. The Enneagram was really a passionate interest of mine some years ago. So revisiting it like this, I quick pulled out my folder and I was going along with my folder with what you were sharing. And, I would say the thing that I think the most valuable was for me to have kind of let myself and others off the hook and to have more compassion for myself and for others, and to really understand and respect the differences. So just an extraordinary presentation in such a small amount of time. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Gard.
As you say, Mary Grace, normally this is a 2-day seminar. So
I understand.
you got the fire hose today.
Well, it was just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Mary Grace, are you willing to share with us your typology?
Sure. I'm a one, but my 2 and 7 are very close.
Oh, yes, yes, very
And
connected.
and that just is like, it's like the system had my name and here I am, and it's so accurate. And the wings, learning all about that and where I go when I'm in upset and where I am when I'm peaceful. And it's just really fascinating. But your
Yeah.
presentation was clear and concise and just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And you as a one with a two wing, I hope you're doing great things out there in the world, because you have a lot of superpowers for doing great things out there in the world. Thank you.
She does indeed, and a lot of people in the group, I think, can attest to that.
Very good. Very good. So you superpowers. Bravo. Ruth, my sister.
Yes. I want to echo what Mary Grace said. It was a marvelous presentation in its depth and simplicity. And I remember the Shift Network had a whole week of Enneagram teachers, and I was listening every day. And by the end of the week, I was exhausted and confused, because the variations on the theme are endless, and the way someone will take one particular aspect of it and develop it, it's fascinating. But when you start hearing all these different variations and detours, it kind of takes you away from the essence again, which is what you pointed out so beautifully today, that first of all, this is not in stone, this is fluid, and that our personalities are also influenced by life events. And what we end up doing in a moment of crisis is we probably go back to who we are at our core, but we can have growing edges all the time. And just one kind of an interesting aside about me is that I was having a lot of blood pressure issues, and I went to a psychologist, therapist, mystical, and he said that my problem was I had excess enthusiasm. And then I thought about the Enneagrams, because that's what characterizes number 7, is this enthusiasm for life, for experience, for not letting a dull moment ever happen. You always have alternatives, other places to go, other people to be with. And the word enthusiasm actually has to do with loving God, right?
Yeah.
So I think that when we discover about ourselves, our nature, and also other people in our family close to us, when we can see that, as you mentioned, our compassion expands, because we also understand how beautifully God made us in so many diverse ways, and I have gratitude for that. And that's one of the things I have mostly now, is gratitude. Thank you so much for this presentation, Gard.
Thank you, Ruth. And you're familiar with the great Rabbi Philo of Alexandria.
Right.
And Philo said something really powerful. He said, when you're aware of what each person is carrying, the only possible response is compassion. So again, and I will say this of Vladimir Putin. I did a class with Thomas Hubble on trauma back during COVID. And you may not know the story, but during the Second World War, Putin's father was walking down the streets of Stalingrad after the siege of Stalingrad, which some of you history buffs know about. Over 1 million people killed, most of them civilians. And he saw a pair of shoes sticking out of the dirt. And he told his comrade, he said, I'm going to go over and pull those shoes. And his comrade said, no, we've got to attend to the living. That person is clearly dead. He said, no, I'm going to pull those shoes. He pulled the shoes. It was his girlfriend and the mother of Vladimir Putin, who was actually still alive.
Wow.
So we ask ourselves the question, what is the personal, collective, and genetic trauma that we carry in this lifetime? And when we see that, we can, as Philo said, the only possible response is compassion. So I'm very compassionate toward Vladimir. I just want him, as Tevye said, far, far away. Okay, Lisa.
Thank you.
So I want to tell you, Gard, that I saw you on Dana White's Myth Salon, and I was just blown away. And I was so excited when I found out you were going to be here today, because I'm a total novice, but I'm so fascinated with this. So as a beginner who is going to start a journey of discovery, what place would I go, or what would I do? Number one, to find out what my number is, and also just more information about enneagrams in general. I kind of dabbled with YouTube, and I looked it up on Google, but I really want to know and be directed by someone who's so knowledgeable about what I need to do for myself to move forward with this.
So yes, so I would get Rizzo and Hudson's book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram. And there's a short test there, but there's also on the Internet Institute, the Enneagram Institute, and there's a longer test. I think it costs $10, $12. It's worth the money. Take it and see. And again, we're all a collage of many different typologies, but we do have a home base, and we do have a wing. We do have an area of growth, and we do have an area of stress. So
Is there a place in the U.S. that is the Institute, the general spot where?
Yeah, if you go there, you'll find out about conferences and all kinds of things. But I just start with that book and hone typology. Yeah.
Wonderful. Bless you for being here. It's just wonderful, wonderful presentation. We have thoroughly enjoyed it.
And tip of the hat to Jonathan Staggers, if he's still here.
He's here.
Of course. Good to see you, Gard.
Brother.
And Gard, thank you for presenting to this small circle in which transformation can take place. Thank you very much.